you're never, when you give an attorney presentation, they're not just going to fall over. They're not just going to not say anything, fall over, and go, here, take everything. That's just not the real world. And they have common obstacles, and then some of them are just crap. They're just stupid, ignorant, stupid crap. And so one of the things that I wanted to share with you is how to handle an obstacle. Now, I'm going to give you a generic formula for handling an obstacle. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to write it out, and I'll email it out so you can actually just memorize it. And when they give obstacles, that's exactly what you're going to want to say. But I want to take just a minute to give you the concept. So what's happening with this obstacle thing? Well, remember, as you're going through establishing need, in other words, it's hurting, okay? They will either go into avoidance or denial. And by the way, that's bad. And when they go into avoidance and denial, I'll cover that later, how to handle that. But that's really bad. And that takes a black belt strategy. You have to know, that's black belt cells. When somebody goes into avoidance and denial, you better have, that's black belt. That's not naive. To actually get that person back into the game and get their business, that's a black belt strategy. That's not, that's not just some pathetic, weak little line. So I'll cover that later. But you never want it to get to that point. And the number one reason it'll get to that point is you'll cover too much too fast. In other words, you won't do micro steps. And chances are you did not follow that presentation, or if you followed it, you did not reverse the attorney and get his micro agreements at each step. In other words, you just kept moving on, and then you covered too many topics. He wasn't in agreement, and then he kind of jumps out and goes into avoidance and denial. Now, so if you just follow it right, that won't happen. It's when you guys try to do too much. You take too big of leaps, or you don't get micro agreement as you're going through the presentation. That's why it'll happen. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of the psychology of when they give resistances. Okay, resistances means obstacles. They're going to say some kind of crap, and most of it has to do with their ignorance. That's what it has to do with. It's just their flat out ignorance. It's all about education. Now, if you don't know, you can't educate them. Okay, so. But I wanted to share with you a basic concept that you want to do when, and I'll give you the exact words and I'll send that out. But when somebody gives resistance, and this is a big concept, you're doing the educational sales, and let's say they're not going into avoidance and denial, they're just going into the obstacles. They're just giving resistance and throwing up obstacles now, because that's what happens in presentations. Remember, it's called needs analysis, and then the presentation is geared towards solving the need, okay? And then after that, there's typically some peripheral, what are called obstacles. That is the normal flow of a purchase. Need, pain-based need. Presentation is the why. The presentation does three things. It shows them how they're going to get the end result they want. That's number one. What's the end result they want? Personal injury attorneys. Policy limits. Number two, it shows why. It shows how it's going to happen. Well, that's what that documentation does. It puts together the whole case and shows step by step how they're going to go to policy limits. That's what that financial claims worksheet does. That's the why component. And then the last one is called the fear component. What's the fear component? It's the money they're losing. So it does all three. So it has the pleasure, the why, and the fear. That's what gets the business. Now, when you do that, you're going to have, that's the normal flow of business. Needs analysis, presentation, and then there's always what's called the obstacles to some degree. And I'll just tell you right now, if you ever give a presentation and nobody asks about obstacles, I would be worried. I'd be really worried. It does not mean you did a kick-butt job. It almost always means they didn't listen to you or they didn't believe you. I'd be really worried if you don't get obstacles. Those are the people that just kind of okay you and move on. And in other words, move on meaning they just go into agreement with you and then you don't get any business. So when you don't get obstacles, you need to understand that is a bad thing, not a good thing. You need to listen for obstacles. Now I'm going to give you the generic. So that's how it works. Needs analysis, presentation, obstacles, and then you get to business. Now, the concept when somebody gives resistance is you cannot tell them. The weakest thing for you to do is go in and tell somebody. And this is what I'm trying to share with you right now is kind of a difficult thing to actually teach. And essentially what happens is when somebody goes into an obstacle, the most common thing the person does is now you tell them why they should do this or that, okay? And it's a huge mistake, and it has nothing to do with content. What I'm talking about has nothing to do with content. It has to do with physiology and psychology, not the logic of your content at all. And the example is, and I use it when I do seminars, I use it all the time. I'll have somebody in the audience just put their hand up. I say, put your hand up. And then I'll put my hand on it, and then I'll slowly start pushing. And when I slowly start pushing, they do not just give in. That is not what naturally happens. When I start pushing, they start pushing back. And that is a natural phenomenon. And that's what you need to understand. When you're telling people, when they have an obstacle, and you tell them something, you're actually making it worse. You're making the defenses go up more and your credibility go down more. It's the worst way to handle that type of business. Now remember, I'm talking conceptually. And how that is handled is just the opposite. It's literally reverse psychology. And so when they say, well, it doesn't work in this state because of blah, or we can't do it here because of blah, or they don't do it here because of blah, it's the same crap chiropractors say. It's their pure ignorance. So the attorney will have, well, you can't do it here. Well, the worst thing you could do is now say, well, yeah, you can. Yes, you can, and da 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 da. Okay, that's like you're going to create more resistance, and that's what happens. Now, what you do is the opposite. You move away from them, and how you move away from them, basically, is you say, well, if you want, basically, you just it's like, well, if that's what you want to do and you don't want to claim it, then that's up to you. And basically, it's like saying, if you want to lose, that's your choice. It's up. In other words, you got to be willing to let go right now. And this is a major mental component of strength. When you're not strong and you're not coming from a position of strength, you'll be weak. So this is almost common what happens. The attorney will give some resistance, and then the doctor, either he won't know how to handle it and get confused, or because he doesn't know, he didn't educate himself, or he'll force the issue and say, well, no, it's because of this. And that is the worst thing you can do. And instead, the psychology is to go, well, if that's all, it's the opposite. It's basically let him say what he's going to say, but then also let him know he's going to lose. And that's his choice to lose. So that is a major concept.